welcome to the New Europe studios where you can watch us make the news. I'm speaking today with Alain Flausch from the International Association of Public Transport. Now, as we know, Mr. Flausch, public transport has been in the news very recently because of pollution.
Yes, indeed. Because of this spectacular good weather we had the last few days in the north of Europe, some city had to take some major measure to control pollution. And one of this was that in Paris, they decided that they would make public transport free so as to reduce the level of pollution. Today they have a different, of course it's not the weekend, it's the working week, but apparently it's just a clear demonstration that public transport is much less polluting than the private car driving, and it's something that has never been really demonstrated, but now it's clear. It works. It works.
I was going to say, I mean, your organisation has been advocating for many years that public transport will help build a sustainable and a greener city, and although we don't like the pollution that we've had, it's absolutely straight now that public transport can reduce pollution by a large amount.
It's one of the major benefits. Of course, the climate or the pollution impact is always, say, downsized, because, every day people want to go to work and things of that sort, and they say, oh, yeah, we don't feel it yet. In fact, pollution is there for ages now, and, the climate change may be also coming out of all this, and I think we need this sort of clear-cut case to show that we were not wrong in advocating for more public transport. But I don't think it's the only advantage. There are plenty of other advantages linked to public transport. And the first that I see, and which have been, I think, also downsized or underestimated, is the contribution to the economic growth. For the large cities, I mean, nobody in London would seriously, except if he's as a driver, would have a car in London, because you can't. Traffic is terrible, parking is very difficult and expensive, and if every Londoners or commuters would come to London and with his car, the whole city will be blocked. So the first thing that the business community advocates for is for traffic congestion charge, but also a lot of public transport. Crossrail in London has been pushed by the business community, which is a clear sign that the connectivity in the city is one of the assets. To give you an example, it's amazing. I was in Moscow, and for only 2 appointments, it took me 8 hours of driving. 8 hours of driving to get 2 points. So imagine if I'm a businessman, I have my salespeople on the field, and they have to make at least 5 to 6 appointments per day to be profitable. If I only can make 2, and obviously I would vote for public transport, because they can move them rapidly in the city.
There's also been a much deeper and more nuanced understanding of the role that public transport has to play in growth and in innovation in many places. What perhaps many people might not realise is that the Transport Commissioner, Sim Callas, is also a user of public transport, which I think it's great to see more public officials actually using the service that they're in charge of. But when it comes to innovation, I've noticed we're seeing electric buses, greener buses. Perhaps could you tell me a little bit more about what's been happening in innovation in public transport, because there's some real improvements going on.
Yes, I think that the old vision was that public transport was an old bus with a lot of black fume and a driver. And so when you go and work in public transport community, you are a driver, either a bus driver, tram driver, or a metro driver. But in fact, it's a total failed picture of what's going on. Public transport has been more and more innovation, new technology, because basically if you want public transport to compete with the private car, you need to offer to your client a service which is of high quality, where he can remain connected most of the time, better than in a car, because actually he has a driver, which you don't have when you drive your car. So you can play with all your device the more you want. You can work when you're in public transport, and that's why from a 4 wheels and a bit of steel that was a bus some years ago, it's now full of equipment, of IT equipment, that makes a smart traveling, counting passenger, to know whether buses are full or not full, ticketing, display for travel information, reducing consumption of fuel. So in the engine, it is full of IT to make sure that you have eco-driving also, that you don't consume too much fuel, you don't make too much shock. It's a pleasant way to drive people. So all this has made this industry a very, very highly cutting-edge technology oriented, and that makes us indeed in full competition with the car industry.
I think you caught one of the things that I've noticed in my life, from it being perhaps a bit of a dingy, down at hill form of getting around when I was very young. It's now spacious, it's now comfortable, it's very, very modern. And of course the other thing is, apart from the innovation, is coming back to the original point about pollution, and that public transport and these new transport ways are becoming part of a way that we're imagining the smart cities of the future.
Yes, the point is that, and it's an old idea, by the end of the last century, there was already in Munich, in Germany, the attempt to be smart to the extent that means using the figures, the data that we have, to advise the user what best to do when he wants to travel from one part to the other. So in those days, there was BMW was involved. There was a high IT manufacturer, Nixdorf, by that time. That failed because there was no support, and the technology, I think, wasn't ripe. Today, there's so many big data around. If you combine them properly and integrate them properly, you can really run the city, not having somebody to watch out on the street, but from a desk, a dashboard, and you run the city, and a passenger can also be having on his own device to say, oh, I don't take the bus this morning because it's late. I take my car until that train. There is a train there. Oh, there is a traffic jam. Then I go to the metro card. So on transportation, I think today you can be a smart traveler, and it's only now up to the public transport community to integrate all those figures so as to make the life of the user or passenger or client, whatever you would call, easier as possible. Because public transport is not easy. You need to help the passenger to do it. And now we have all the tools that helps him to make the best use of and to have the best mobility.
I mean, one of the ways, and I've changed how I use public transport here, and I don't have a car myself. I rely entirely on the public transport systems. Is that on my smartphone, I've got a little app, but many other people will tell you the nearest tram stops, train stops,
and when the tram comes,
when they're all coming, where they're all going, and you can tie that in. I've seen with some other applications that if you put something in your calendar, when the time comes, you actually get everything, including how to public transport.
Yeah, indeed.
So the systems have grown and evolved in ways that really do seem quite incredible. But we're still talking about cities, and I've just got one final point I would like to make, because I've also lived in a rural environment. And when will these kind of smart buses, these smart transport systems, what will they do for the many people who don't live in the cities?
And that's a real issue, because to some extent the rural transport has been abandoned, as if, you know, public transport was for the city and the car was for the rural area. Now obviously the rural area, they're not only rich people with big cars, there are also people that want just to be transported. And that's, I think, is going to be the challenge for the future. Maybe channeling some money, which is now on the wrong side, we'll say, like subsidies for agriculture, and trying to make, on the contrary, at least a basic service for public transport for the rural area. And that's something that, you know, it's difficult, because today the number of representatives of the rural areas is much smaller than it used to be. So their weight on parliament level is, or on regional level, is much lighter than it used to be. But there is definitely something that we need to do. And we, as UITP, will tackle this.
So I would just say then, as a final question, we've seen a lot of advances in what sort of vehicles and infrastructure that public transport has. We've seen it become more and more kind of acceptable broadly politically to put money into. And there seems to be more of an understanding that it is an important and vital part of our future. Is that correct? Is that The right impression?
I think there has been a tremendous evolution since the last 15 years. When I started in public transport in 2000, public transport was like a social tool used to bring poor people to the city. It is now viewed as a really important contributor to the development of the cities and a green, sustainable way to do it. And so it's still, some politicians are still far away from doing what they're talking about. So my role today is to make sure that they put their action close to their mouths and that they finally say, yeah, it's great, but then let's put the money on the table. And that's where UTIP can help, showing them routes that they don't know, they haven't to pursue, and trying to help them funding the whole thing, because it's basically the issue. It's funding all this. It's a lot of money, but the money is there. It's just the way to channel it, which is an issue today.
And of course, as we've seen this week, if you want people to be able to breathe in the city, it gets a lot easier if you've got a good public transport system.
Indeed, I think that's a good conclusion.
Thank you very much for your time. All the best.
Thank you. Perfect.